Maunalua, past, present, and future. My name is Anne-Marie Kirk. I serve as a cultural advisor to the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui, and I'm also the founder of Maunalua.net. Thank you so much for joining us on our show. Today, I'm super excited to have someone I really admire and respect, and that is historian DeSoto Brown. Aloha, DeSoto.
Well, aloha, and thank you for having me on the show.
I always love talking story with you, and if I ever run into you, it's not a quick hello, it's like a 30-minute conversation, some new topics, so it's always so fun. But you know, you're a man of many talents, and one of those talents is writing books.
True.
Let's take a look at some of the titles that you have that we can have our community go out and see. We have Aloha Waikiki, Hawaii Recalls, The Art of the Aloha Shirt, Hawaii Goes to War, Surfing, and Hawaii at Play. Looking at that, I just think of a lot of work. What do you think of, DeSoto?
Well, I think of a lot of work as well. It's fun and interesting to look back at all the processes that I went through for that. My first book was published in 1982. That was Hawaii Recalls. And I've done a number of books and articles since that time. And I also do a lot of in-person presentations, PowerPoints, lectures. And I'm working a lot now on social media for Bishop Museum to get our resources out to the people in the community who've never seen them, because Bishop Museum is filled with so many treasures, which is where I work in Bishop Museum archives.
Right. So when we talk about the work that you do, when we talk about like these different books that you have, I was curious, each of them is an image from the past that it's now going digital into a whole different...
That's right.
So that photographer who took that photo 60 years ago had no idea that those images would live on.
Oh, absolutely. No, we're in a very different time period for people who are creators and people who are collectors, curators, archivists. Not only is there the digital world to deal with in terms of how do you archive it, if it's not a physical thing, but it's also the beautiful aspect of it is that you can put things out to so many people.
Right.
That people do not have to physically come to you to see the things, but instead you can show it to them. That's wonderful.
It's totally wonderful. But every story has a beginning. Every photograph has a beginning. So I want to take a look at you when you were a young boy. Let's take a look at you as a young boy here in Hawaii.
Yes, okay, all right.
And let's look at that little boy.
There's that little boy. Well, the picture on the left was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. That's at my grandmother's house, which was on the beach at Diamond Head. And in the picture on the right, that's me, the smallest person in that group, with my brother, my sister, and my sister's friend in front of the International Marketplace in Waikiki in 1961.
Fantastic. And let's take a look at the next picture. And in that next picture, we're also going to see you as a young boy.
Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, Tops Restaurant used to be in Waikiki, and going there was a major treat. And on the right-hand side, I am wearing a matching set of Aloha shirt and trunks, which I thought was really fashionable. And that's me at the age of 5 in 1959.
And this photo was titled One Eye. That's your...
Well, that's because the dog had one eye. The dog, that was Pepe. That was our first dog, and he got hit by a truck when he was a puppy, so he had only one eye, Puting.
Oh my gosh. And then, you know, as we talk story when you're a small kid, what started this historian? What started this work?
That is a very good question. It's just in me. It is something that's in me. I didn't have to work at it. It was, even as a little child, in some of the pictures you saw, I had the feeling that I had to save things. I had the feeling that things had to be saved, they had to be preserved, and if other people weren't going to do it, I had to do it. This started before I was even 10 years old.
Wow.
And that's been my entire life, is not only personally collecting things, but also working at Bishop Museum to preserve things there too.
And the things you're collecting are to tell a story of a period of time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as you started to get older, I mean, you grew up Diamond Head, Kapahulu side.
Yes.
You went to Punahou.
Yes.
And then from Punahou, what happened though? You ended up going somewhere else.
Well, I went to a boarding school in Connecticut. That was because that's what everybody in my family did. I was very unhappy there. I did not like being away from home. Came back, and eventually I attended Hawaii Loa College, which is now part of Hawaii Pacific University, and I graduated from there.
Well, let's take a look at you as you're a little bit older and you're becoming the person you are today.
Yes.
We have you there as a young teenager.
That's me as a teenager.
With the short hair and the suit.
With the short hair and the suit, because that's the way I had to dress when I was at boarding school.
Wow. And then there you are, a little bit different.
And there I am in 1991. with long hair, back when I had hair.
So we look at you from the young boy in the tie
Yep.
to the long hair, and in between that, though, is the continual growth of you as a historian and a researcher.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting is that that's part of your family legacy.
Absolutely, that's true.
And being at the Bishop Museum is part of that legacy. I want to take a look at this next picture we have, because I think it's really important to tell the story about who you are. This is the Bishop Museum's sign-in for the first day the museum opens. Can you tell me what we're looking at in that picture?
Well, okay, in the larger picture on the left, it's the guest book for the opening day of Bishop Museum, which was June 22nd, 1891. And obviously the first and most important person to sign this guest book was Queen Liliuokalani. And this was during her reign. This is after she had taken over from her brother Kalakaua on his death, before the overthrow in 1893. So she was the first person to sign. And the second person to sign, Irene E.E. Brown, is my great-grandmother. She traveled to the museum with the Queen, along with the other three women whose names are below, to go to this event.
And that's her in that photo.
And so that's Queen Liliuokalani on the right, and that is my great-grandmother, Irene E.E. Brown. Holloway was her second husband's name. And so I like to say that it's kind of preordained that I would be a Bishop Museum employee and be there for my whole life.
When I saw that picture, I was blown away. I think, especially in Hawaiian families, if we really look, we can trace our roots back to see what our kupuna were doing. We find ourselves doing the same thing. But Irene's, go on.
No, and you're absolutely right. I just want to agree with you that, that these things come down through the generations to us, even if we don't consciously know it. I believe that's true.
And then looking at Irene, and then let's take a look at her father and who he was. So let's take a look at our next image.
Yes.
And tell me about who we're looking at here.
Okay, this is my great-great-grandfather, John Papa E.E. He was born in 1800. He was an early convert to Christianity. He was an advisor to and a close confidant and personal friend of Kamehameha II, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. He was a Supreme Court justice, and he had just one child, who was Irene. And so that's who I'm descended from. Now, what we know him for today is the reminiscences he wrote as an elderly man, which were published in Hawaiian language newspapers in 1868. And those were gathered together and published as a book by Bishop Museum in the late 1950s, which is called Fragments of Hawaiian History. John Papa E.E. is one of the three major Hawaiian historians whose writings and memories constitute a good deal of what we know about that time period. So he was a historian, and I'm a historian. And again, I think that's something I kind of inherited.
And he was an author.
He was an author.
And you're an author.
And I'm an author.
And he collected about culture, and you collect about culture.
That's right.
I mean, it's amazing. Like when I saw that picture and to be sitting here with you, we have, again, the digital world informing us and the mana of your kupuna coming to us, right? Let's take a look at his daughter again. Let's take a look at our next picture. And this is Irene. What a beautiful woman.
So this is Irene E.E. Brown Holloway, and she is my great-grandmother, the sole child of John Papa E.E. She was a well-known person in her time period. She was known for her philanthropy and her assistance to Hawaiian people. She also collected, she inherited Hawaiian antiquities and other treasures and things like that. So that is somebody, again, by the descendancy that has come to me, which when I look at it, I mean, I know I'm descended, but it astonishes me. Yeah,
it's just amazing. I want to take a look at our next picture of your family. And this goes to, because your family was from Waipio, and this is a luau that was held by your...
So this is on the ancestral land, which is the Waipio Peninsula of Pearl Harbor. It's between East Lock and Middle Lock of Pearl Harbor. Wow. So this was John Papa E.E.'s land. This was then inherited as an estate by his daughter Irene. The man sitting on the far right is my great-grandfather, Charles Augustus Brown, who married Irene E.E. And he, unfortunately, was a scoundrel.
There's always one in the family.
There is one. He was from Massachusetts, and he, I think, married my great-grandmother for her land.
Ooh.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes.
not a subject it's not unknown to us.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
it's happened here. Well, Irene had how many sons?
She had 2 sons. Her older son George is my grandfather, and then her other son was Francis. Francis E. Brown was well known in his time period because he was a champion golfer. He was a very larger-than-life personality, and he was also a senator in the Territorial Senate. So he spent a lot of money, and that was one of the reasons people knew him. But he was accomplished in his own right.
Yep. You know, it's interesting because this show is called Maunalua, Past, Present, and Future, that there is a connection from your family to Maunalua with ŌleloNet home. Let's take a look at our next image, and that'll tell some of that story.
Yes, so what happened with ŌleloNet home? It was started after the death of King ŌleloNet, and his estate funded the home to be a care home for elderly Hawaiian people. Unfortunately, the language of his trust said that it was going to terminate at a specific date. So the original ŌleloNet home, which was on the grounds of what's now Roosevelt High School near Punch Bowl, were taken over, and the home came to an end. My ancestors, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Charles Augustus Brown, my grandfather, George E. Brown, and my great-uncle, Francis E. Brown, purchased the property that became the current ŌleloNet home in the 1920s, which is just after it came to its end in 1927. They bought the existing structure, which had been built for the Marconi Wireless Company, and that got turned into the ŌleloNet home.
And that Marconi company that comes here, people don't realize today when they're doing the Cocoa Head staircase that goes all the way back to them being here and has that tie to ŌleloNet home, which becomes, well, was the RCA building, becomes the ŌleloNet home. Again, a legacy now in your family that's even more about culture and community, right? Again, it's astonishing, as you say, I like that word to speak about your family. As we're in Maunalua in the 1920s, 30s, 40s was really isolated. What changes that? What comes to Hawaii and changes not only Maunalua but other places?
Everything. Well, the automobile. The automobile is what came to Hawaii. The first automobiles got here in 1899, and interestingly enough, 2 came in on the same ship. They were electric cars. We think electric cars are a whole new thing. No. There were electric cars from the very beginning. There were steam-powered cars and then gasoline-powered cars. So car ownership grew rapidly to the point where we are saturated with cars. And we've had lots of cars since then. But when that happened, not only, first of all, did you need to build a lot of roads to accommodate cars, which is something relevant for Maunalua, exactly, but also it allows development further away from urban areas because people can live someplace and then commute to a job, or they can drive to shop, buy food, etc. That's why it's no longer as isolated as it was.
Right. I want to show you the next image, and it comes from the 1920s. And the cars are now going out of what we would see as Waikiki or Honolulu. They're going out to Makapu'u. They're going out to Hanauma. They are going around the fish pond. All of this is in the 20s in these roads that were not really roads.
Exactly. And what's happening in this, what this is talking about is there was a road that went out to where Kuapa Fish Pond is, but it didn't go any further. So there was no road around the coastline where the blowhole is, for example. That's what this overland car is. They're saying, hey, it managed to drive all that way without a road. Well, the road wasn't constructed until the 1930s. That last section of road between kind of Kalama Valley and the top right before you overlook Hanauma Bay.
What I love too is, and let's take a look at our next image to talk more how cars change families. This is a car from 1926, I believe.
It is correct. That's a 1926 license plate.
Yeah, I know your license plate.
I know.
Tell me about a family like this family right here, how that car changed them.
Okay, so what's important here is cars initially were so expensive that only wealthy people could own them. So it took some time before car ownership became possible for other people lower in the economic status. And that's what we see here. We see an elderly Japanese lady holding a baby, and that means that these are not wealthy people, these are just regular people. That means that they have now the opportunity to own an automobile. That means they can drive where they want to, they can shop where they want to, they can live where they want to. That's what cars do, and that's why all of us are addicted to cars.
And let's take a look at our next image, because that tells a story too. We have now people going out to the beaches like they would have done in East Oahu, right? They would have taken the cars and driven out and really changed the community.
Absolutely, because the cars allow recreation as well. They're not just for serious purposes. So this is allowing people to do things like go to the beach for recreation, but also to go fish, to go for fun, not just because it's subsistence, but now fishing and other ocean activities are not for keeping yourself fed, but gradually they become just for recreation because you've got a job that pays you money and you go, we're living in a capitalist economy as opposed to subsistence.
Right. I mean, it's so true, because when you see the cars going out, and I started looking at those first articles of the automobile coming into East Oahu, you definitely see things change. The roads are changing to accommodate the cars. Now, like you said, people are moving out from Honolulu and want to live out in the country, which would have been Wailupe, Niu, Kuli'o'o, right?
Yeah, and all of that, gradually you see the city spreading outwards. You see urbanization spreading outwards, and more importantly, suburbs spreading outwards. And particularly after World War II is when the East Oahu suburbs began to be created. So Aina, the sad story of the fish pond being filled in to become the Wailupe Peninsula of expensive homes, and then eventually the Hawaii Kai development because of Henry J. Kaiser starting in 1960-61. And again, all of that is because of cars, but you can no longer have a 2-lane Kalanianaole highway with just 1 lane in each direction to get to that. So the highway eventually gets widened to where it's multiple lanes with a medial strip, and that's what we live with now.
And as those cars start going out there, people aren't only going out there to recreation or to see what's, they're moving out there, but there's also, we have archaeologists now being able to access these areas.
That's exactly right.
And I want to look at our next image and talk about 2 archaeologists that did work in East Oahu,
Yes.
Kenneth Emery and Dr. Sinoto.
Yes.
Tell me about what the work that they did in Maunalua and how getting out there
well,
changed the story.
this is exactly what you're just talking about, as you just said. With automobiles, you can get to a variety of places to do this archaeological work. Dr. Kenneth Emery on the left, both of these men worked for Bishop Museum. I knew Dr. Emery slightly, but I knew Yoshi Shinoda pretty well. Dr. Emery had been started in the 1920s, but when Dr. Shinoda came here in the 1950s, he was trying to travel through the Hawaiian Islands to get to California from Japan to continue his education. Dr. Emery at the Bishop Museum said, nope, you have to stay here with me.
Yeah.
And what Yoshi brought to this whole situation was a modern version of archaeology in which you drew out a specific plan, and then you excavated very carefully to find the layers of what artifacts were left. And so it is through his work that we learned a tremendous amount more about the history of when Hawaiians came here and what areas they populated, because of course there are no written records of that.
Right.
It is through the small things that those people created and left behind, the fires they made and things like that, that could be found through archaeology, that we learn about what they used, what resources they had, and the things that they made. And it was through things like finding fish hooks.
Right.
They did a major excavation at a cave called Makaniolu in the early 1950s. My mother assisted with that archaeological dig.
That's awesome.
And at that, one of my brothers found the first tattoo needle, the first Hawaiian tattoo needle that had ever been found.
Yeah.
Through
That's
Dr.
major.
Emery.
Yeah.
And so my mother was involved in these things, as was my father as well. So there were many layers of ancestors.
That's incredible. And, we look at, again, the East Side and cars bringing people out here and archaeologists. And other technology comes radiocarbon dating.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about that?
So what happened was, in the 1950s, it became possible for the first time to find pieces of charcoal that had been burned by people in ancient times. And through them, through the decay of the natural radioactivity that was in the wood that was burned, you could tell how old it was. This enabled us, therefore, as I said, to get a much clearer timeline of when Hawaiians came here, and also the places where they had lived longer than others. So again, humans living in the environment always leave behind traces that we were here, whether it's us now or whether it was people 1,000 years ago or more. That's how archaeologists can determine these types of inhabitation patterns.
So it's interesting because we have now science coming, right? Technology.
Yes.
But I want to look at our next image because it's really interesting to always have our science, but then our kupuna to be with there with us.
Yes.
Because now we have to balance our mo'olelo
Absolutely.
with science. And here we see...
And they work together.
They work
together.
So,
this is Mary Kavenapukuhi. She was also a Bishop Museum employee. I only met her once when she was quite elderly, but I worked with her daughter, Pat Bacon, for some time, and I heard a lot about Mary Kavenapukuhi. She spent her life learning. She spent her life gathering and preserving information, whether it was written down or whether people told it to her. That was her life goal. And she gathered as much as possible. She constantly was interacting with Dr. Emery on these types of discussions. What are the oral traditions? What are the oral histories? What do we know from what people have passed on through their discussion?
And I love in both of these photos, she's a young woman reading, studying, educating herself. And then there she is at Kaupo in East Oahu, probably collecting stories there. And again, going back to Emery and Sinoto and having those discussions.
Absolutely.
Right?
And what she's doing in the picture, what she was doing in the picture on the right, she was gathering twigs of prostrate Ilima, the Ilima Papa, and she was making a basket. Oh, this is something that somebody had taught her. So she was demonstrating, here's how you gather it, here's how you make it into a basket. So she worked with her hands. She also was, she studied hula. She could also sing. She could play Hawaiian instruments. She recorded songs. She wrote lyrics for songs. Right. Incredibly talented and incredibly, her mind just was so inquisitive and wanted so much to preserve. If she had not worked on all those things, there's so much we would not know about Hawaiian culture.
You know, I agree with you. When I think of her, I just always want to mahalo her for the work. But then also mahalo all those kupuna who talked to her.
Absolutely.
Because they had to share those stories.
Absolutely.
And as we look at, you know, like Maunalua, we have so much from a few kupuna that she met with and was able to talk story with them. And then it's amazing, you know, that did the Bishop Museum find her, or did she find the Bishop Museum? Right?
Both. I think it was both. Yeah. And it's fortunate the Bishop Museum existed at the time when she was beginning that journey in the 1920s for her to be able to end up there. And it's just luck that I ended up at Bishop Museum too.
I don't think it's luck.
Well, I think it was but her too. Yeah. I think it was meant that these paths would cross, and that both she and I and many other people would end up being able to work at a place where our knowledge could be preserved and we could also impart it to other people.
You know, when you look at that line of your family as we shared, and we didn't even get into it, we were at the surface on it, right?
Yes,
I mean, it's so deep. What do you say to other people out there in their own family histories to follow the passion of their kupuna? Yep. Can you talk about that, please?
Well, it's always talk to people, learn from people, write down, record them. Not everybody wants to be recorded, so that's something you can't always do, but you can write stuff down. The older people in your family that you interact with, get what they know, write it down. I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to people who said, and me too, oh, I wish I had talked to so-and-so. I wish I wrote that down. I thought I would remember it, and now I can't. Write it down, not only for yourself, but everybody who comes after you.
What's something you wrote down from a kupuna that you still reflect on today and go, wow, this was changing for me. This made a difference in my life.
You know, there's not one thing I can point to. There's just one thing. but there's so much I absorbed. I absorbed history from my parents. My parents always talked about history. My parents, when we drove around, my mother would say, that was so-and-so's house, and then they married that person, and then their kids are there, etc. These are things I just heard all the time. My mother studied Hawaiian in the 1950s with Sam Elbert, who was a co-writer of the Hawaiian Language Dictionary. Yes. She knew, and also from Dr. Emery, she knew Mo'olelo about certain places. Not many, but she would always tell those to us. My dad loved history too. And so my dad would talk about who was related to who, et cetera. So those were direct things. But then all this other stuff from reading Kavena's writings and to listening to people. And I've gained so much knowledge from visual materials like photographs. Photographs have so much information. You just need to spend the time and now analyzing them and looking carefully.
And the great thing is with digital technology, we can actually scan them at higher rates.
Yeah.
So now we see things in the photos that we couldn't have seen even 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And they reveal themselves in stories. You know, I was thinking about how you spoke about your parents being in history. My parents are into history, and I think the greatest gift they gave me is curiosity.
Yes. Yeah, and the desire to learn. And I don't know that any particular thing made me go in that direction. I think it was just there. But even as a kid, as I said, I already was interested in what happened before I was alive. What was life like? And I had just a basic interest of, did they listen to the radio? When did they get TV? When did they get cars? How did they get places? And things like that. And that's what I wanted to learn.
And it's funny because as the more we learn, the more we realize, oh my God, there's so much more to discover. And there's so much more to discover in this conversation I'm having with DeSoto, because we were going to do one show, and then we said to each other, we can't do one, we're going to do two. So this is the first of two shows. So mahalo for joining us on Maunalua, Past, Present, and Future. I just want to say I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please, if you have any questions about the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui, please email directors@hawaiikaihui.org. To learn more about Maunalua, please go to maunalua.net. And stay tuned, this is a part 2 of this conversation, so I hope you join us then. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, and aloha.